Gabrielle. I'm so happy to have you on today talking to me about all things foraging, ecosystems. I'm really excited.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Gabrielle, you have such a unique relationship with your ecosystems. And before we get into all of that, will you tell me about you?
Oh, man. Yeah. I am a wild food educator, mushroom fanatic, I guess you could say. I'm a grad student, and I spend a lot of time just out in forests trying to understand them better.
Gabrielle, you describe yourself as a mycologist. Can you explain what on earth that is?
Sure. So a mycologist is very simply just somebody who studies mushrooms. There aren't a lot of formal designations for people who study mushrooms in the United States. If I lived abroad, I probably wouldn't call myself a mycologist because you can go to school for that there. But here, I just try to involve myself in a lot of local research, in microscopy, in identifying mushrooms, and in understanding more about them.
So I'm just going to get right into it. I think that a lot of people don't really realize just how healing it can be to eat the food that grows naturally, right in their backyard, essentially, maybe 200 miles from where they live. And I'm excited to talk to you because you have a special perspective on that. And so can you tell us about your relationship with your own local ecosystem and how it feeds you and how you feed it in return?
Oh my gosh, I love this question. I moved here not that long ago, just a couple of years ago, and
where's
the
here?
Whole process of I live in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Okay,
which is like it sounds like a nothing town, and it's so not. There's just so much beauty around here. There's so much nature. There's so much biodiversity, and it's just in these little pockets. And so when I moved here, I just started walking. And checking out what was growing around me, walking around the neighborhood, walking through the wooded areas, and you really start to pick up on the personality of a place when you do that, and the way that things change over time. So, like, I love visiting the same places over and over and over again because they are always different. Ecosystems are living, breathing things that we're part of. So the more time you spend in the same place, the more beautiful it gets. And then just when it comes to food, like, there's just this beautiful reciprocity that happens when you're eating from the places that are near to you. You start to develop this really special connection with place. And it makes you want to care for place more. It makes you want to care for that tree that feeds you, that log that provides you with mushrooms, all of the beauty that's around you. You want to keep it beautiful and you want to make it more beautiful. So I find that, like, I go through these cycles of giving and taking with the place that I live. I'm participating in permaculture during the colder months when I'm not taking as much. And I'm participating in, like, eating the gifts that nature provides during the warmer months. And because I live in a place with distinguishable seasons, it's a really nice way to just exist in the world.
Taking in the beauty and then knowing that you wanted to protect it and appreciate it. Where did that start for you? Did it start recently, or was that ingrained in you as a little person?
Yeah, that started for me in childhood. When I was 5 years old, my family moved to the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania, and we were surrounded by blueberry bushes. I didn't know it when I was little, but a neighbor pointed them out and said, "Oh, that's food. You can eat that." And I think at that point, I was just fascinated by the fact that not just food, but, like, really amazing, perfect food grew in my backyard. And I would track the way that the blueberry bushes developed. So I would go out and I would look for the first flowers in the spring, and I would wait for the flowers to turn to green berries, and then just wait and keep going out to the same trees over and over until I could finally pick berries and I could finally eat them. And it was so much of my creative imagination. It was just, it revolved around the natural cycle of food growing, eating food, and then winter.
You just reminded me of when I was a little girl. There was blackberry bushes just 3 houses down, and my mom would take us when we would walk the dogs, and we would just pick blackberries endlessly. I mean, they were massive. It almost took up a whole lot of a home. And I remember the same thing, just feeling so happy that you could pick something and put it in your mouth. And you call yourself a citizen scientist, correct? Can you? And I know that you're a mic. Yeah.
Yeah, citizen scientist. I guess a lot of people are saying community scientist now to be more inclusive. But the idea is like it's still the same, that you're a lay person who is doing field work.
Can you tell me about the journey? So at first you had this experience with blueberries when you were little, and then now here you are back in Michigan. When was the sort of awakening that this is something you need to put all your attention on and make you sort of an activist about it? What was it that what was the problem you saw and the thing you were trying to solve, essentially?
I think that the more I learned about wild food in my mid-20s, the more I realized how much people didn't know about wild food. And I realized that I was cooking with things that most people never talk about or taste. I would go to, before I started foraging for things, like I would go to the grocery store for things like onions. And now I pick wild onions that are so much better and so much tastier and growing everywhere because they're invasive, but like most people don't even know that that's there. Most people don't know that they can walk into their backyard and pick allium banale and use it and eat it, and it's amazing. And I especially found that with mushrooms, and specifically the fear of mushrooms that a lot of Americans have. There are many cultures where mushrooms are like hunting your own mushrooms is just a thing you do. I mean, if you go to Eastern Europe, if you go somewhere in like Poland or Hungary, everybody goes out to the forest after it rains to pick their mushrooms. People don't buy grocery store mushrooms. But then, certainly like places like Japan and China, where mushrooms are just a much bigger part of a person's diet. And then you come to the US, and here, most people have only ever tried one kind of mushroom and decided that they either like or hate it. And most people think that if you pick and eat wild mushrooms, you'll probably die, which is something that I try to educate about, because there are just so many amazing fungi that grow in the places where most of us live that people walk right past. People don't even know that they're there.
Mushrooms are delicious, and I love all kinds of mushrooms. And because of the fear that people have that they're going to pick the wrong one, how does one get is there a simple education to know how to pick the mushrooms that are good? And the chanterelle mushrooms don't look the same. I mean, there are some mushrooms that are, or morels,
yeah.
Morels. And what's my other favorite? Oh, maitake. I love my maitakes. Oyster mushrooms. I mean, that's what we cook. I make oyster mushroom tacos all the time. They're so delicious, right? But are you going out into your hiking area to find them, or where are you getting those mushrooms?
Yeah, I hike. All of the mushrooms that you just mentioned are mushrooms that I forage here in Michigan. Every single one is something that I find here. So I walk. I visit parks. I visit little forests around here. I visit bogs. There are tons of places that I go. But regarding the question about is there a simple education? I think there is. I think that learning a few anatomical features of different fungi can really help. I usually recommend that people start with mushrooms that don't have lookalikes. So most people are concerned when they start mushroom hunting, I'm going to pick the wrong mushroom because I'm going to pick a lookalike. But, you can safely hunt for things like puffball mushrooms if you know a few things about puffballs. If you know that you only eat things that are pure white on the inside, you only eat them if you don't see the outline of another mushroom inside. And that's pretty simple. They're pretty easy to see when you're out in the woods, and they don't grow everywhere. They're pretty common here in the Midwest and east of the Great Plains. But there are things that are pretty safe to forage for. Chanterelles, they have a couple lookalikes, but there are also some things that you can learn to help you identify them. They have a very distinct smell. They smell kind of like a stone fruit, like an apricot. You can peel them like string cheese, and they're white on the inside. They're like a beautiful golden orange color. And you can sort of learn some things about where they grow to help you identify further. So there are good things that you can learn. And it doesn't have to be everything. You can learn 3 or 4 mushrooms really, really well and forage them with confidence.
And are you having to go off the beaten path on your hikes? Because I don't see mushrooms growing on my hikes.
I often do. I find a lot of mushrooms growing in areas with like a lot of dead wood. Mushrooms like decaying things, typically. I find mushrooms in places with really old trees. So when I'm looking for mushrooms, I'm not usually looking at the ground. I'm looking at the trees. I'm looking at the landscape, the ecology. Is there a water source nearby? What does the ground feel like under my feet? And I find that helps me a lot more than trying to pick a mushroom out of a forest. There's no one answer. The place that I'm going to go to look for chanterelles is going to be very different from the place that I go to look for a morel. And the time of year is going to vary too. Right now I could go out and hunt for oyster mushrooms, and I would look for decaying wood. I would look for hardwood. I would look for places that get kind of wet and gross. And that's where I would find them. I would go to a bog. I would go to a fen. I would go to somewhere like that. But that's going to be different than the places I'm going to go look for my chicken of the woods.
And so the ones that you're finding, the real onions that you're finding out there, I want to find sweet onions out in the world. How would I find them?
It depends on where you live. But I typically find 3 different kinds, of alliums where I live. One of them is invasive, Allium venale. It's sometimes called onion grass. And it's like the long, skinny, tubular grass that you see growing in your yard that smells like onion. That's a type of onion. So you can use it in cooking. I find that it works really well to use in place of spring onion because it looks very similar. You can kind of chop it and use the green parts in as like a garnish for things. I also love it in hummus. It's super good in hummus. I also find another type of allium called Allium canadense, which is like very underrated. It's a native species that grows near here, and it's so underappreciated in the culinary world. It's kind of on the sweeter side. And then I also find ramps, which are Allium tricoccum, and they're a topic in foraging because they take a really long time to grow, so you don't want to dig them up by the roots. But the leaves are just some of the best tasting, sweet, intense onion flavor I've ever experienced. They're so good.
If I was listening right now, I might be itching to go I want to go right now, but I don't know how to start. Where do I go on a walk every day with my dogs, or I go on a walk every day with my friends, or I'm walking around. How do I begin to figure out how to find food while I'm walking?
Oh my God, I love this question. So the thing that I usually tell people is don't go deep in the woods to go find food to start. Find things on your walk. Find things if you don't know what they are, then that's the place to start. Start with your own curiosity. Go what is that tree? And there are definitely tools that can help you. Starting with getting a good local guide and a good national guide, I've found is really helpful for mushrooms. Apps can be helpful. I don't recommend that you use an app to identify your food, but it can be a really good way to sort of narrow down what you're looking at so that you can cross-reference it in a book. There are also a ton of online groups that help people. Not everybody has access to classes and things. I know I didn't. I couldn't afford it. So I spent a lot of time just hanging out in Facebook groups for foragers. There are, I think, foraging groups for almost every state in the US. There are international foraging groups that I'm part of. And there are so many knowledgeable people there who offer their services for free. I see world-renowned mycologists answering questions in Facebook forums all the time for people. And you're going to get a little bit of training on like the things that people need to see in order to identify things. And that's also going to help you in your own personal identification journeys. I started out in Facebook groups. I found a mushroom and I didn't know what it was. And I took a bunch of pictures and uploaded them to Facebook. And somebody helped me. Somebody was kind and was able to like work around the fact that I didn't give them like everything they needed. And I was able to get an answer to my question. And I learned a ton in that process. And it spurred me on to learn more. Facebook groups can sometimes be places for people to just be jerks and to show off. But more often than not, there are really kind people who are really happy to get to just info dump about the things that they love. And you can use that to your advantage. Like, please use that to your advantage.
I think for me, my greatest concern, well, not my greatest concern, but one of my many concerns is we're using too much energy and resources to live our lives. And we want to minimize that as much as possible so that we can live the healthiest, most, glorious lives and spread that for future generations. And so, the way I shop is I grow my food. That's my first shopping spree. I grow my own food and I go to the farmer's market. I have to say I have foraged in my life, but it's not a part of my shopping. Like it's not how I acquire my food on the daily or on the weekly. So I just wanted to talk to you more about why that's so important and why should people care about getting their food locally? Why is this such an important thing for our health and our future?
That's a really great question. And I think it goes back to the Seattle permaculture thing you brought up. In a large way. I think that it is very, very hard in modern society to develop community. And specifically to develop community within like the place where you live. I know that when I go to my farmer's market, because I buy things from my farmer's market, some of my farmer's market purchases are things that were probably foraged, but I like supporting the people who do that. I know that I'm getting food that is way more nutritionally dense because it has not made a long journey to get there. A lot of it was probably picked that morning. I know that I can get like bread that was baked just a few doors down from where I live. And I get to know the people who do that. And I love that you brought that up because it's all about people, right? It's about getting to form those relationships and feel that just like intense warmth of eating something that was produced so lovingly, so close to you. The further away, the more steps you add in between the producer and the consumer, the less our food matters to us. I may not feel as bad if I end up having to throw away something that I bought at a grocery store as I would feel if I threw away something that I picked myself or that I bought from one of these farmers that I knew put love and care into it. And it's also a good way to reduce the amount of human suffering that goes into your food. Like factory farming and the human injustices that happen on large farms where migrant workers are picking your food for nothing and being horribly abused in the process and not given places to relieve themselves, which produces just like more problems with the food that we get. The number of listeria outbreaks that we end up with every year is just abhorrent. And a lot of that is because of the horrible conditions that we're putting people in order to keep getting food in our grocery stores. And I think that is, it makes you more connected to what you're eating. It makes you care about it more. It makes you waste less when you're getting things closer to you.
You were talking at one point, I think I read this, that you said you're less likely to be passive about someone bulldozing a building or apartment, bulldozing natural land to make an apartment building or something like that when you're connected to your land. And my question to you is, have you had experiences, or how have you seen this in action, where you are actually able to protect and fight for our community because of your love and passion for what you're doing? How does that work out?
Yeah, it's hard. It's a hard thing to do because a lot of it is done so surreptitiously. Somebody just purchases land and they are allowed to do that. And then they build on it because they are allowed to do that and they get the permits. But there are larger scale things where I think we do have a voice. Recently there was a petition going around about the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota. And I've been to the Boundary Waters. It is a system of it's the world's largest dark sky park, or maybe the nation's largest dark sky park. It's a beautiful place, just tons of rivers and lakes. And recently, a group of people decided that they wanted to start a mining project that would severely affect the ecology of the Boundary Waters. TikTok communities and people on Facebook and people throughout various social media have been able to make their voices heard, have been able to sign petitions and write letters to their senators and their representatives to say, look, we find value in our wild spaces. We find value in the things that grow around us and in the biodiversity and even just in the massive savings that we get from storm protection from places like this, from drainage. There are huge benefits to keeping certain spaces as wild as we can with management. And it made a difference.
So we talked about mushrooms and onions. Are there any other things that you just get so excited about that foods that we don't even know about? I love daikon. You're not going to find daikon on a hike. That's and umeboshi plums and these weird things that most people don't, unless you're sort of Japanese or following a macrobiotic diet, you probably don't know about them. But I'm glad that we're bringing them to the forefront. What are the things that you're discovering that we don't know about, foods that I need to know about and go find that are so delicious?
Oh my God. Oh, there are so many things. I try to think of these things in categories. I think we all would benefit from eating more flowers. There are so many beautiful edible flowers. There's one that we have here, a flowering tree called a redbud. Redbuds are beautiful. They taste like beans. They're so pretty. You can make the most gorgeous jelly out of them. It looks like magic. It looks like something a fairy should eat. I love eating violets. I love eating goldenrod and milkweed. Oh my God, milkweed. And one thing that I think is useful to point out is that not everything is going to taste good right when you get it, but learning a few ways to process foods in a way that makes them taste really good is just life-changing. Learning how to lacto-ferment something is always going to be amazing.
Tell me more about lacto-fermenting. What do you mean?
It's actually a very simple process. You take your food by weight, whether it's a vegetable, a fruit, whatever, and then you add 2% of that weight back in non-iodized salt. And you let it sit. You open the lid a couple times throughout the week, and within 5 days, you have gorgeous, fragrant, perfumey, delicious food. I lacto ferment all kinds of things. It's not pickling, because pickling usually has a brine or something like that going on. But lacto fermenting is a very, very simple process that basically anybody with a mason jar can do. A mason jar and a scale. So
I do that with vegetables and I ferment them. I still think of it as pickling because to me in the macrobiotic culture, we talk about when we say pickles, we're talking about basically a fermented vegetable. And so it's not the same process, you're correct, but it gives you the same result in the end. If you're not using sugar and nasty stuff, you're getting a sort of something that your body really responds to. You're getting the probiotics. Your body goes, thank you so much for giving me those natural probiotics. It helps you digest things better. I think it's really healthy. And that's fantastic that you can do that, you're saying, with things that you're foraging, because maybe they wouldn't taste as good on their own. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, sometimes. Sometimes things just taste way better if you process them a little bit. just doing like a quick little ferment, or you can do things like make misos. You can do all kinds of things with forage foods. And, not everybody is going to like the taste of like a dandelion green right off the bat.
I love dandelion green.
But if you blanch it, I love dandelion greens too. I like bitter. I crave bitter. But like, if you don't like bitter, just like blanch it. Just a quick little blanch. Add it to your smoothie. Add it to your salad. Add it to a ramen.
Yes. Like, chop it up like
we love that.
It's so good for you to have bitter in your diet, and dandelion is so healing. And I chop them up very tiny because I used to have them growing wild in the garden a lot. So I guess I did forage first because I didn't plant them. Yeah. They just showed up. Borage flowers as well always just show up at my house. And one time a huge pumpkin showed up. I don't know, it was the animals, the birds must have brought it to my house. But
it's a gift.
But there's a really good dandelion to chop it up tiny, like almost as if you're using it like a cilantro, although of course it doesn't taste like cilantro, but a fresh herb. So it's just, you're not getting too much of it, but also sauteing it and putting delicious garbanzo beans with it and like lemon zest. It's so good. So yes. I'm all over the dandelion greens. Those are so good.
Yeah. Some things are amazing when you just go like berry to mouth. And then other things, you just need to work with them a little bit. Sometimes they need a little massaging. Wild food can be a little high maintenance at times, but we can all be a little high maintenance at times. It's fine.
We talked a little bit or a lot about permaculture, and I just want to make sure that in case somebody doesn't really understand permaculture, that we both express. You're going to say it better than I am, but here we go. My take on permaculture is working with the land. Rather like if you've got a hillside and the hillside is sliding down, you want to go in the rain and sit there and watch and go, well, rather than just building a bunch of walls that might create other problems, you sort of go in and go, well, where is it happening? And what can I gently do to enhance what's already happening, but stop the problem? It's practical living and making nature work with you, but not work against you, not go, you will bend to my needs, nature, which is what we do in all areas of life, unfortunately. But instead it's saying, beautiful nature, with reverence, I ask you, what would be best right now? How can I get what I need and serve you at the same time? And I think it's so beautiful if we could do that everywhere, right? Because we would be in a much better state with our climate and people getting sick and all of that. So did I describe permaculture well, or can you say it? Go ahead. You say it better.
I think you said it perfectly. I think you said it beautifully, because it really is about assessing the needs of a specific environment, a specific ecology. And I think that I'll add that I think that part of it is looking at that space and thinking, what should be here? What can I add, even if it isn't here already? And what shouldn't be here? So I will do this sometimes with places where I forage and I find like a lot of garlic mustard or something that's very invasive. So I think, what would be here if the garlic mustard wasn't choking everything out? And then I go back to, I look at the trees, I look at like, okay, well, I bet that because there are all of these oaks around, I could throw some dried chicken of the woods out here, shove it under some bark and just see what happens. So I go back to my house and I go back to my like catalog of seeds and I pull stuff out and then I scatter things there and I collect seeds during the fall. That's like the foraging I do. I collect seeds and trash everywhere I go. But pulling out some of those things that shouldn't be there and putting things that I want to see there that I know are going to attract wildlife and that I also know are probably going to bring me food the following year. It just benefits everybody. It's that cycle of reciprocity. It's really like, instead of looking at the land and saying, what do I want from you? I think it's valuable to look at the land and say, what do you need from me? Because the land will care for you if you care for it.
Do you find yourself eating a lot more plants than you do other foods because you're out foraging and things and you have such an appreciation for what grows?
I do. So I'm not a vegan, but I end up eating a lot of vegan food just like by default because, I'm not like foraging burgers. It doesn't work that way. So like every time I do eat meat, it's like very local, coming from people that I like trust and whose farms I love. But I eat a lot of plants, and then sometimes I'll make a recipe and like throw it up on TikTok, and somebody will be like, "Wait, I thought you were vegan." I'm like, "No, that's the other forager. The other forager's the vegan." But I do eat a lot of plants, and I don't eat nearly as much meat, and I will chalk that up in part to how many mushrooms I eat, because people don't realize the textural capacities of mushrooms in a culinary sense. Oh my goodness. There are things where mushrooms just work better than meat. You can get such a great texture out of an oyster mushroom, like you were saying. You can get such great textures out of polypores, like chicken of the woods. You know, I've made stuff from chicken of the woods that was indistinguishable from actual chicken.
So are you, I clearly you're passionate about this. Do you have a concern or a dream for the world? Is there something that you really want to fix that you have your eye on?
I think it comes back to that moment where I realized that people didn't know things that I thought maybe they should. This knowledge of what is growing around us was not special knowledge even 100 years ago. And certainly isn't special knowledge in other places today, where people rely on the land to provide their food. You know, I run into more people now that are interested in foraging than I ever have in my entire life. And what foraging does is it just develops this huge appreciation for the place where you are. And there's something so valuable about that can't even be properly described until somebody gets that bug. Until somebody finds themselves out in the woods and they recognize something. I see this with kids all the time. I run into kids on the trail sometimes, and I'll give them little free trail lessons because I love getting to teach kids this ancestral knowledge. And seeing them recognize something and that light go off is just indescribably wonderful, because I know that child is going to grow up and they're always going to know what that plant is, or they're always going to know what that mushroom is. And it breeds this familiarity. It breeds this conversation with environment that's so important.
I wonder if a lot of people are thinking right now, oh my God, that sounds so inconvenient, all of this. And so I wonder if you can speak to really, is it inconvenient? And what does convenience really mean in the big picture? How do you put value where it belongs, really?
Yeah. And I'm going to be really interested to hear what you have to say about this too, because we both live lives where our food comes from interesting places. Mm-hmm. I guess that I would counter that idea. I don't think it's inconvenient. I get so much out of this. I find it incredibly convenient to walk down the block and go pick berries. I find it really convenient to grow chicken of the woods on a log not that far from where I live, so I can just go pick it whenever I want. That's all incredibly convenient. I'm making my work so much easier for me. Maybe that's like kind of lazy of me. I don't want to get in the car and drive to the grocery store, but I get so much. Like, I'm getting outside. I'm running into my neighbors. I'm eating things that I feel like I worked for, like that I directly worked for. And that's incredibly valuable. And I felt the same way when I've grown my own food. And like, going to the grocery store to pick up tomatoes is not an enjoyable experience. It takes time. The tomatoes are never good for some reason. Mm-mm. And then you get back home and you still have to cook them. But then you could go outside to your beautiful garden with gorgeous sun-ripened tomatoes and eat a few on the way back. And that is a holistically wonderful experience.
We think these things are convenient, and they're not. They harm us in the long run. So all of my food choices, like you said, give me so much joy. It gives me so much joy to go to the farmer's market, to think about what I want to eat based on what I see. Like, ooh, those little turnips, those little white turnips that look so fantastic at the farmer's market, then I'm like, I want turnips. It's weird to want turnips, but you want them because they look so beautiful. Or you see a celery root growing and you go, that big bulb and you go, I want that, the things that, so I don't find it inconvenient at all, but it does take reprioritizing. Just the other day, I was having a conversation with a friend talking about how they could eat better, get more food in their bodies and get better food in their bodies. And the response was, I know, but like, I'm not that interested in it and I don't really care, but I said, okay, but what you do care about is feeling good, right? You want to feel good. You want to feel good for your work. You want to feel good for your kid. You want to feel good for your life. And so if it takes 5 more minutes or 15 minutes that night before to think about where's my breakfast coming from? Where's my lunch coming from? Where am I getting my dinner? And just map it out in your mind so that you can be prepared. Take care of yourself first as a priority because it will benefit you. You will reap the rewards of that tenfold. That little effort that you put in, planning the week before. Yes, I agree with you 100%. It's not inconvenient. It's inconvenient to be sick, not feel good, disconnected, and afraid. Those things are very inconvenient, and we spend too much time in those states. So being empowered and feeling your best and eating tons of plants, all of those things will only help you.
Yeah. And it is like, there's so much nuance to that conversation because there are so many people who are just struggling to get by. I mean, I've been there. It is hard. And it's really hard when somebody else owns the vast majority of your time and you're just struggling to like, not my situation, but like you're struggling to just like get your kids to school and get food in them and hope that you get to eat too at some point during your day. And like, there are systemic things that need to happen so that we can take better care of ourselves. Mm-hmm. There are massive changes that need to be made. And part of that comes back to empowering communities to take care of each other. Mm-hmm. And empowering communities to do that through food, to do that through caring for one another, to do that through like services being available locally. And I think that that's just really important to add. It can be such a privilege to like eat the way that you and I do. Like we get to choose that. And not everybody does. A lot of people have so many choices in their lives made for them by their job, by their daycare, by the government that they don't get to make a lot of those choices. And so I think like just focusing on like the free or very cheap ways that you can do that, like even if it comes down to like, hey, like let's sponsor some community garden plots for people to be able to grow some of their own food if they can't afford that. Like there are some really good ways to help your community through that kind of mutual aid. And I really encourage people who have the means to do that.
I think what you said is beautiful. And I would add that people who grow food outside of their doors for people so that they can walk by and take, like you're taking from, just take what they need is a really beautiful thing. I would also say that the concept of privilege with food, remember that originally, back in the day, the healthiest people on the planet were the common man, not the royalty, because they ate beans, rice, and vegetables. And that is what they ate because that's what they were given. And it was the kings and queens who had gout. And it was very cool to have gout because that meant that you had money and you were eating meat. Yes, we have to empower people and educate people. But I think there are a lot of people who do have privilege, but still don't know how to eat well. So I'm speaking to them. And then there are people, there's loads of those, so many of those. And then there are people who are really just trying to survive. And I totally get that. And the people that are really trying to survive, I just want to remind them that McDonald's is not the answer. It might be cheap and it might be quick. But if you can just get back to your roots and make something that your heritage taught you to make, you will find that it's cheap, it satiates you, and it's delicious. I don't think food has to be so expensive. And I don't think this argument that eating like a vegan diet or a healthy diet is expensive, the amount of time you lose in your life being sick from the food you chose. All of that costs something, and not being able to feel good to be present with our children costs something. Being unhappy in our skin, not feeling good, our moods, it costs something. So I think that reprioritizing that and understanding that we do all have choices to make, and we have to work as a community to educate so that those people who don't know and they're just trying to survive, we can show them that this could help you. My goodness, this was such a good conversation. I'm so glad I got to speak with you. I really enjoyed it. You inspired me. And I'm just grateful that you're doing what you're doing. Thank you so much, Gabrielle.
Thank you so much for having me. This was just so much fun. And I just love how you're approaching this topic, not just in your own life, but it sounds like in the lives of a lot of people.
Thank you.